I'm Dr Barbara Mitra, and this is a talk on surveillance society. So I'm going to draw on concepts such as the Panopticon and Synopticon, and I'm going to relate it, of course, to COVID-19 in various places as well. So we can begin by thinking about what is the Panopticon. So according to Jeremy Bentham, who is associated with the term Panopticon, it's a series of writings on prison reform, and it was about an ideal prison where inmates were housed in this kind of circular structure, and there was a watchtower in the middle. But they didn't know if they were being watched, so there was one guard in here, and the guard could see out, but the prisoners couldn't see him. And Bentham thought that this would induce prisoners to change their behaviour. So later, Michel Foucault then takes up this idea and relates it to disciplinary power, power exercised by individuals over ourselves, how we change and modify our behaviour. So this idea of self-surveillance and self-monitoring becomes important in relation to these ideas. So we can think about the whole idea of surveillance society, so where individuals monitor our behaviour, and it happens at all levels in society, so hospitals, schools, workplaces, home. So surveillance is ingrained in contemporary life. So if you think about, for example, a speed camera and you're driving, you might automatically slow down whether or not there's film there. There's also corporate surveillance on employees and others. So for example, logging onto a computer or shopping, you click OK on those cookies. There's logs of your search history and records are kept on us. So it could be a growth chart, for example, but phone bills, card payments. So some argue that we're now in a super panopticon where everything is recorded. And of course, we willingly participate. I think COVID-19 is interesting in terms of this because I've kind of been reading things about us almost surveying on our neighbours, thinking about who is and isn't adhering to lockdown rules, who's taking part in clapping or not, and whether there's punishment if we don't conform to those rules. So the virtual panopticon, then we can think about these ideas in relation to the internet and where we're subject to surveillance on social networks, for example, which can be a little bit more complex because we can also use this to survey others and also to survey institutions. But at the same time, we're the subject of surveillance, so what we write remains on record and could affect future employment. So, for example, some companies in America actually ask for login details of Facebook for potential employees. So social networks also control then how we think about ourselves as well as the habits, and it might result in physical punishment if you're shamed. So for example, if on Twitter somebody challenges or points out something that you've done, you could lose employment through bad behaviour being recorded. But at the same time, it does relate to these ideas of the panopticon because we don't know how we're being watched. We just assume we are. We don't know whether those people are present or not. But it's about getting us to change our behaviour to conform to norms. So we can think about these ideas in relation to images and lifestyles. So these are part of control in relation to self-surveillance. So it's not just adhering to societal norms, but also ourselves. So how we look, for example, our routines, what we eat, whether we do exercise. And also, as I've mentioned before, if we don't conform, shame, we can be shamed by others if we don't regulate our behaviour. So these ideas also relate to Goffman and the ideas of the observation of others based on how we think others see us. So we want to present ourselves in particular ways. We want to maybe show that we're conforming to these norms. So some people argue about this panoptic gaze. And of course, influencers are part of the idealized lifestyles that maybe we think we should be conforming to. One idea that is quite topical is this idea of data mining. So the CIA and 5 corporate surveillance, all kind of records that are kept on us of where we shop, but also our emails, COVID-19 apps, kids control, Snapchat, facial recognition that has been trialled. So in 2009, the UK took steps to have a legal requirement of telecom and internet service providers to keep records of our personal communications, so who we contact, when, where, websites. And there are also intelligence gathering operations, so things like visible technologies, which crawls various posts and blogs and Twitter and YouTube, etc. And of course, the micro-targeting of ads that we all have shows how our data, how our big data is used, how things are grouped together to target us specifically. So in 2016, we had the Investigatory Powers Bill, the Snoopers Charter, which became law, where security services in the UK can bug computers and phones with a warrant, and companies have to comply. They can also analyse bulk data sets, so security services can look at things like NHS records. So this is a little screen grab from Liberty's website, which highlights that in coronavirus epidemic, the government is giving high priority to secret surveillance. So there is kind of GDPR has an exception clause where in the overwhelming public interest, personal data can be kept. There's also the coronavirus bill. The bill can mean that people can be held and detained if police think somebody is infectious. They can also restrict public events and gatherings and impose travel restrictions. This bill is meant to last for up to 2 years. There's also this COVID app. So the COVID app uses an ID number to send alert messages to a specific phone. It's controlled by NHS England and NHS Improvement and the Department of Health and Social Care. So it's centralised compared to other countries, some of which are using decentralised apps. So it does single out individuals, even though it says, or some things say it doesn't, but actually it's going to have to if it's going to send you an alert message to a specific phone. So Google and Apple have their decentralised version. So personal information is allowed to be collected by organisations during this crisis. However, whilst we have the idea of the Panopticon, the few looking, surveying the many, the Synopticon is the opposite, if you like, the many surveying the few. So maybe organisations can be held to account. The gaze of the cameras can also focus on things like politicians being caught out, lockdown rules. You also can have online petitions where issues can be raised in Parliament through the power of social media, for example. However, I suppose the main idea and argument is, where does power lie? And that's one of the key issues regarding surveillance. Who's doing the surveillance? So Goffman's book, Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, there's all sorts of bills going through, GDPR, Investigatory Powers Act, and of course Liberty as well. And then some questions for you to think about really in relation to this topic. You know, how much information is stored about you? If you do a Google search on your name, what comes up? Does catching criminals justify that surveillance? And of course we all willingly give our information, don't we? Are you watching your neighbours to see if they're obeying the lockdown rules? or whether they're clapping, for example. You know, and what does that tell us about society and about our behaviour? And are you going to download this app? And that's all I really want to say about this topic.